So we're getting ready to do the easy shirt. And the easy shirt has its own few little unique concepts to it, including having a hood. So we're going to do view C today. And so we'll be applying the hood as, instead of a collar. But let's start out first. Everyone should have their pattern guide. And we are starting on page 12. Now last week we talked about cutting it out so the plaids matched, and I gave you like pretty much the easiest recipe for matching plaids so that it isn't a giant origami puzzle. Origami is probably not the right word, but anyway, so you should have it cut out, should have your interfacing on, and in the booklet on page 11 it shows exactly where to put the interfacing and what width to put down the front, all of that good stuff. So you should have all that done before you sit down to sew. We're going to start off with the plackets. So because I'm putting the hood on, and you don't do this if you're doing the collar, but if you're putting the hood on, you're going to take your placket and fold it on the fold line, right sides together. It's only going to stay here like this for a minute. All right, so you're going to start filming?
You just went right into it, so yeah.
Oh.
Sure.
Was there anything else we were going to talk about before we got started?
I don't know. We have a couple announcements, but we can do them at the end.
Oh, go ahead. Announcements. Butterick patterns are $2 while they last, so make sure you take a look at what's there. They're going fast. That's the way we like it. We want to get them cleared out of here, make room for new products and new inventory. So those are all patterns that were produced by Butterick but designed and drafted by Connie Crawford. So these will be their last of their breed. Connie's not creating any more patterns, especially not with Butterick. And what else do we have?
The Aquino and the Cocas are still on clearance, the fabric. And somebody mentioned, I lost it, that they really liked your jacket and they asked if this was our fabric.
It was. It's just not anymore. Yeah. It's about through. I can't even tell you.
But we always pick out really fun fabrics in that weight, so we do still have some left that are on clearance on the website. So again, nothing wrong with them. We're just, as you know, Janet loves shopping and buying more fabric, and we need to make room. So just making room for new stuff, but there's some great pieces still available.
Okay. So I'm working with the, it's called the antique black and white because it's really not stark black or stark white. And I decided to use a dark gray thread, and it really kind of blends throughout the whole pattern. So that's what I like. But again, do your stitch samples. Hang on. I have a couple of stitch samples here from 2 of my previous easy shirts. So we do these stitch samples, which means there's 2 pieces of the fashion fabric, and sandwiched inside is the same configuration of interfacing that we would have on our placket or our cuffs. Then you can start testing the color of thread you want to stitch, the stitch length you want to use, and then when you get ready at the very end to put buttonholes in, you've got this right by your side to test out your buttonholes. So test out your stitching, and these also come in handy when, and we all have had this problem, when all of a sudden the tension goes wacko on us or something's not working right. So we can test it on the same fabric and make sure that it's going to stitch correctly when we move back to our garment. So the stitch sample is invaluable. Okay, so I've got my pocket prepared, but we'll get to that in a minute. So you're going to have a left and a right. And one of my important tips that works really well for me is that I'm always confirming that everything is a right and a left, and that I'm stitching from the right side of the fabric, and that everything's matching up. So before you start, make sure you have a right and a left. I cannot tell you how easy it is to have two lefts or two rights because the fabric looks so similar. Look at that. Other than feel, you cannot tell the difference, and you can barely tell the difference by feel. That's why when we cut them out, and I don't see my marks on here, but I made the suggestion that somehow you identify the wrong side of every pattern piece. So you can use a chalk marker, you can use some masking tape, you could use safety pin, whatever is going to help you stay on track to make sure you don't reverse the piece. Okay, so again, we're going to start with the left, and we're going to fold it back right on that fold line. And then there was a little notch that I talked about when we were cutting out. So I've marked it with chalk here. And we're going to stitch a 3/8 inch seam allowance right up to that chalk line. So we start a little bit ahead of the fold so we can back up. Ooh, let's turn that stitch length down. We try to come right up to that notch and then definitely back up a couple of stitches. So that's what we did. And then we're going to have to clip this out. So we're going to clip right down to the stitching. And I think we want to trim this out a little bit. Let's see. You can trim a little bit of this out. Now with your point turner, I have a couple here, I'll use this. Not really a point turner, but it'll work. Yeah, I backed up and it still came out. Hold on. I don't know why that happened. And then you want to make sure you get a nice square corner when you fold this out. And it should look something similar. It'll look like that. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing with the right side. So you'll have a similar mark on the right side. Fold it right on the clip or the fold mark. Remember, I created my fold line right at the pattern break, so it makes it pretty easy to fold on that, to know right where to fold. But if you don't have an indication or you're using a solid fabric, then by all means chalk that line or give yourself some kind of indication. Now again, this is a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Most of our patterns have a 1/4 inch seam allowance at the neck edge, but this one, it's a long story, but we created it at 3/8. So that's it for that little prep work. And again, if you're putting the collar on, by all means don't do this, because your collar won't fit. Okay, so that's our right. Here's our left. Now, the placket on here, for those of you who took the last sew along, where we did the everybody shirt, remember we folded the placket twice. So we've got two types of interfacing in here. Our firm interfacing's on this side. Our lightweight is the closest to the outside edge. And they butt up right at the fold line. So we're going to fold it here, and we're going to fold it one more time. and then we are going to stitch 1/4 of an inch from the fold. I'm going to clip this. So 1/4 of an inch from that fold. Remember, thumb under, fingers on top. Your left hand is helping guide the seam allowance. You really have to hang on to it because otherwise that bottom layer is going to shift and the top layer is going to shift forward and the bottom layer is going to shift back, and then you're going to have a tweaked placket. So this is the difference between using pins and not using pins. We're just using our hands to keep that from happening. And because we understand what's happening, we can counteract it quite easily. So, and if you remember from the everybody's, or maybe you weren't there, so this is new to you, we must unfold this now. We do not leave this folded. It has to come unfolded because this is going to be our placket. Now I'm going to stitch 1/4 of an inch from the other fold, but make sure it's unfolded before you do that. The reason I'm really emphasizing that is I occasionally get an email from someone who says my collar won't fit. Why won't my collar fit? Did you make a mistake in your pattern? No, but you misunderstood the directions on the placket. I always know what the problem is. So if you leave that folded, you don't have enough of a neckline on the left side of your shirt. Now for those of you who are turning this into a women's version, of course you're doing this in reverse. So this placket is on the right for you. So there's our left front placket. And this is the placket that'll get the buttonholes in it eventually. Alright, so let's go to the right side. Now this one's done a little differently. It is not the same as the everybody's. So in this case, we want to make sure we don't tweak this again. So if you're using a solid fabric or a fabric that isn't as easy to identify, keeping it straight, because of course we'll line all these up, right? If you don't have that ability with the type of fabric that you chose, then take a chalkener and chalk every 6 or 8, 10 inches, whichever you feel most comfortable with. Then you'll know that you've got to keep these lines. Once we turn this under and we're stitching, these lines should be directly across from each other. So that'll help you keep it on track. Because if you get part way down and they're not matching, you want to stop right there. You don't want to have to unstitch the whole thing. You just want to have to rip the least amount. So what we're going to do here is we're going to turn under 1/4 of an inch. And we're going to be stitching a needle width away from the folded edge. So you want to get that started. I'm going to go this way, I think. Alright. So I'm going to turn this under 1/4 of an inch. Okay. Okay. So we're going to come down a little ways. We've got that folded under. And remember, a needle width away so that we really nail down that folded edge. And again, keep that lined up. Do not let that bottom layer of that placket go through faster than the top layer. But if you're using one of our plaids, you can see right now what's happening, and you'll know the minute that you might be off. But it's still important, thumb under, fingers on top. Almost home. This just takes a little bit of practice to do this without pins or basting. So what I always say is if it's frustrating you without the pins, try putting in a lot less pins. Try putting in half as many and remembering to hold it. Thumb under, fingers on top. Once you get this system down using your right and left hand together, you will be able to let those pins go. But you just might need to use a few until you get used to it. And you see, if you did not come out even, top and bottom down here, that's what I'm talking about. It's shifted. You don't want that to happen. So here is our right front placket, and it's all ready for the buttonholes. Now, I don't know. I don't think we stitched down the right side of that in this guide. Let me take a look. Left, right, doesn't look like it. No, yes it does. So this is optional, but I usually like to stitch a needle width away on the outside of the placket as well. I like how the stitching on a folded edge really flattens it out and gives it just a really nice clean finish look. Okay, so the next step is to put our pocket on. And I'm going to show you a couple little tricks that I haven't shown you before on making a pocket. So one thing is, we are giving you measurements on page 14 on how to make the pocket placement lines. Now the reason we did that is our pattern printing. When we went to print a pattern, we didn't realize it, but those marks got left off for some reason. So that's where our solution is. So you're going to come down 6 inches and 2 3/8 over from the center front line. So make sure you're on that center front line, 2 3/8 inches over, and then another 7 3/8 for the other corner. And you'll mark that with the chalk, which I've already done. So I've come down the center front 6 inches over 2 3/8, and I made a mark. And then I came over 7 3/8, and that's the other mark. So my pocket's going to sit here. If you're putting 2 on, then you do the same thing on the right side. I'm only putting 1 on this one. So we've got our placement marks. Now we're going to hem our pocket. Again, the only reason I would interface the whole pocket is because it's on the bias, and I would use the lightest interfacing you have to do that. Otherwise, if your pocket is not on the bias, you're going to interface the hem from the fold to the raw edge of the hem. Okay? So now we're going to turn this under 1/4 inch. For those of you who might be either newer to sewing or really uncomfortable with trying to eyeball 1/4 inch, I've gone ahead and chalked that 1/4 inch with my chalkener. So now I'm just going to fold right on that. So we're going to fold right on that chalk line, and we're going to hem our pocket by stitching a needle width away from that fold. Now before I get started, I get that my needle's holding that in place, and this is where we call the needle and the foot here, the foot's down, the needle's down. That's our third hand, so we can come back here. We've got our other 2 hands free, and get that folded under, and grab it thumb under, fingers on top, and then fold it right on that chalk line, stitching a needle width away. And of course, don't let it tweak on you, so you really want to hang on to this. And so now we have our pocket hemmed. Now, another little trick I'm showing you today that I haven't shown before is I put a basting stitch in. You could chalk it as well. I put a basting stitch in at 1/4 inch all around the 3 sides of the pocket to get sewn down. Now, you could do it with a chalk. However, when you have a stitching line, the fabric wants to turn on the stitching. So that also helps. And then we'll just pull the basting stitch out. You could do this basting stitch in a contrasting color so you can see it easily to pull it out. But make sure it's a long stitch. Alright, so we know our pocket is going to go right up here. We've got everything marked. And just like we did before, we can go ahead and pin this one into place so it doesn't get lost on us while we're stitching. Okay, so we're going to fold under on that stitching line, and if you're going to reinforce this corner, you can start here, stitch up at an angle, stitch across, and come back down. If you do that, count the stitches across. There might be 1, there might be 2. So that when you get up here to do the same thing, you can come across with the same amount of stitches and angle to the exact same point on this side, and then both sides of your pocket will be symmetrical. Alright, I'm not going to do that because I like to go around the pocket twice with a double stitching, so that's what I'm going to do. Alright, keeping this nice and straight, I'm going to turn under that 1/4 inch on that stitching line. Take a hold of the shirt and the pocket, thumb under, fingers on top, and I'm going to stitch a needle width away, but don't let that pocket move, and stop it about halfway down so that you can fold in the bottom hem of the pocket. Remember to dial down if you can't exactly hit your spot. So I dialed down a shorter stitch length there. Okay, so now we want to come across and fold the rest of the hem under. Okay. Make sure everything's still staying on track. Remember not to pull on the bottom of this pocket because it is biased, and you'll get a little curve in the bottom of that pocket if you pull on it. Just always make sure everything's sitting straight and neat. And now we're going to turn under this side here. You don't want to get too close before you turn it under because then it becomes difficult to get your fingers in there. Okay. Now we're just going to turn again. It's a little more difficult when you get up to the hem to keep it under. It wants to fight you a little bit. I think we're doing good. Now, this is where if you had done that reinforcement and you knew you had taken 2 stitches here, you would take 2 stitches here and then angle back here. That would make both of these triangle reinforcements identical. Okay, so 2 stitches. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yep. I'm going to come down and now I'm going to do my double stitching. I really like a double stitch pocket. Number one, especially if they use it, it's not going to come undone or rip out at the corners. Two stitches here, 1, 2. Whoops, don't do that. And then just come back to where you started, go over it a couple of stitches, back up 1, and there's your pocket.
Janet, can you repeat for Pam about what interfacing to use when on the pocket? Like you interface the entire pocket because it's bias.
Yeah, the pocket that I cut is bias, so it gets a little stretchy. So we use a very light interfacing, which in this case was light and stable, for the whole pocket. But if you're not on the bias, then you only want interfacing in this hem. And let me see here. I think back on page 11, you're going to see, it's you interface it right to the fold line and right to the raw edge.
And a light interfacing for that as well?
Yes. Absolutely, light and stable goes there. Okay, any other questions about putting a pocket on? We're moving right along here. Nope, okay, good. Now, of course, you could put 2 pockets on, and if you remember with the black and white one I showed you the last couple of weeks, I did put the 2 pockets on. And that's a fun look too, so it's entirely up to you. And then last week, we did get a question about, well, what about if you're making it for a lady, and maybe you don't want the pockets too prominent on the bust line? Well, you have a lot of options. One I suggested is you audition the pocket. Once you have the shoulder seams in, you can set it on there and see. But the one thing about this shirt, as opposed to, say, the shirt we did last time, that was a woman's shirt with a lot of fitting to it. This is not a fitted shirt. It's very straight, very boxy. It's more like it can be worn as an outer shirt, like with a t-shirt or a turtleneck underneath. You can wear it as a dress shirt as well, but just know that it is boxy and it's not fitted for a woman. You can always bring some shaping into it, and you know how to do that from all of our fitting classes.
So what you're saying is on this, where some women who are busty don't like the pocket,
right.
It's not always as
big of a
deal on something that's not fitted.
Yeah, when you have a fitted and then the pockets are there and you have a prominent bust line, it kind of sticks out, and you know you can't use those pockets because they're going around a breast, right? So, but on a shirt like this that sort of hangs out from the body, it's not as big a deal. However, someone also made the suggestion is putting the inseam pockets in the side seams, and you can add those and just put them in the side seams, and then you have your pockets, because we do love a pocket. Okay, so next we're going to apply the yoke to the back. So I cut, is this my bag? Yes. So let me set the fronts aside for a minute. We'll get back to those. So with the back, we cut 2 yolks. And you should have cut 2 yolks as well. Now I like to cut the yoke for the back that's going to show to the public on the bias to create a little differentiation between where that seam hits. And let's see, make sure I find the wrong side of this baby. I think this is the wrong side. I don't see any marks. Alright, we're going with it. Alright. So, in other words, and I see these in ready-made shirts all the time, and they make me crazy. So they just cut the yoke out any old way, and it sits up here, and this one would match, and almost, and that's the problem. That looks kind of bad to me. And even if you cut this particular plaid going the opposite direction, it's still going to look bad because this is just a checkerboard as opposed to a multi-stripe plaid. So that's why I like to put it on the bias, because I don't think that looks so good. And I don't even think if we matched it up, it looks that great. Because then we've lost the line, the design line of the yoke. So I'm going to put a bias on there. It doesn't, for 1 minute, look like it's supposed to match. So there's nothing disturbing the eye like, oh, they almost matched that, but not quite. So I'm going to put the bias on the right sides together with the back. So the right side of the back to the right side of the bias yoke, or whichever yoke piece that you've intended to be seen by the public. You know, sometimes I'll cut out 2 yokes and then I'll look at them real carefully and decide which one's the very most pristine to go on the outside. You know, they might be just identical, and then it doesn't matter. Stitch this at 1/4 inch. Now the final stitching is 3/8, but this 1/4 inch is just to hold this in place until we get the second yoke on. And remember, we did a little nip in the center back of the back, and there should be one in the yoke. You see, there it is. So we want these. And you see how cool this is for matching? Can you get a good close-up on that? You see, there's no guesswork. Those are spot on. Little tiny little notches. If you have a 5/8 inch seam allowance, you can have a much deeper notch. But when the seam allowance is so small, like here, we have to make those little slits really short. So you just want to line this up. Remember, your left hand is working too. I'm going to stitch this at 1/4. And I'm not worrying about anything past the notch. That's what I'm hanging on to, and I'm going to stitch right up to that notch. And when I get there, then I'm going to come back here and line up the other end of the yolk to the back. Line everything out nice. And then I can just go for home. Always have the raw edges even together. Don't let yourself think, oh, it doesn't really matter that much. Because it does. I'm a pattern drafter, and I'm going to tell you every piece, if the pattern is drafted well, is drafted to fit together exactly. All right, so you're just going to turn your back over. So now we're on the wrong side of the back. And we're going to apply the yolk facing.
While you're getting that together, I just wanted to say that Diane mentioned that she's thinking about using this pattern to make a shacket, which if you are following the current trend right now of a shacket, which is a shirt and a jacket combined, it is the perfect pattern for that. It definitely goes right on trend with that.
Absolutely. I was just shopping for the teenagers this morning, and there was a ton of these kind of garments available at Old Navy and some of the other department stores. Okay, once again, you're going to have that notch. And you may have noticed when you stitch something, it pulls it up ever so slightly. Not a lot, but just enough that it's a tiny bit shorter. So make sure that you make these match. So you see it's a tiny bit shorter, so I just have to pull that notch over there. This notch, and see? Here's this notch. There's that notch. Right there. Right there. So it's just a little bit, but you want them to match, so you just put that up there. Now the seam allowance is 3/8. The yoke is right side of the yoke to the wrong side of the back now. This is our facing yoke or our inside yoke that the public never sees. And we're sewing this at 3/8 of an inch.
And what is your stitch length?
I like a 3. Now when we top stitch, I like a 4. I didn't use a 4 on this, and I think it looks nice. But the heavier the loft of fabric, the thicker that you're stitching through, the more the stitches will get buried into the fabric, the smaller they are. So again, take your stitch sample and try a couple of different stitch lengths, because when you're top stitching, you want those stitches to be obvious. That's part of the look, especially in a shirt. So you want them to sit up on top of the fabric. You don't want them buried in there where you can't see the actual stitches. You can just see a groove. We're just going to finish this off at 3/8. Now, this, especially with this particular pattern, you could be putting both of these on at the same time, both yolks, and do it at 3/8. I don't recommend it with your first shirt, but if I wasn't showing you this, that's what I would be doing, is putting them both on at the same time. It's one time across as opposed to 2. It's just one less step that you have to do. But in the beginning, do the 2 steps. It will serve you well. All right, so then here's the back of our shirt. And I don't know how we're doing for time, so I don't know. This is all I had planned for today, but I think we do the shoulder seams. Where are we at for time, Jess?
You can do it.
All right.
You're at 15 minutes.
Okay. Leave the iron on. This has got to be pressed.
Oh, then we'll do it next week. Because we also don't have white fang. What do you call it?
White fang, yeah.
White fang. So that would be the next step, to press.
Yes, you would press. And it's important that I think we should just Do you feel okay about going over to the ironing station? No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Don't trip.
I just as soon get the shoulder seams done this week. So, let's see. Gotta turn this on, but I'm gonna explain it while I'm waiting for it to heat up. So you've got to press both sides of this, and you want this as flat as possible. So the best thing to do is get your yoke up on the top, get your iron, and then push that seam forward so that it's not rolling onto the back. And you'll be pressing, and making sure. Then you're going to turn it over, and here's what you're going to find on the other side. You're going to find that this side did roll. You see that? Watch how big of a difference it is. So you want to press this side equally to make sure it's up there. So you want to give it some good steam, and then you want to use your clapper. And the clapper is what flattens the seam out and makes it so nice. And I don't know if you can see the difference here, Jess, but it makes it so much nicer and easier to top stitch nicely. So the clapper is invaluable, and the best thing about a clapper is it's a lifetime investment because you never need another one. They don't wear out. So I'm going to come over again to the front, to the right side of the shirt, and apply that same concept using the clapper to make sure it stays. The clapper forces the fabric to stay the way you pressed it. Otherwise, it has a tendency after you've pressed it, even if you've used steam and a nice heavy iron, it has a tendency to pop back up. And we don't want it to do that, because the flatter the seam is, the easier it is to get a nice, pretty top stitching.
Uh-oh.
Did we lose?
We lost the camera somehow.
Did the battery die?
Just says we're live.
Huh.
It says there's no, they can hear us.
They can hear us. You can hear us, but you can't see us. I'm sorry. We're working. We have technical difficulties.
Good idea. There we go.
All right, we're back. Okay, let's find out what they might have missed.
Like, I'm guessing.
Let's find out. Give us a shout out. Did you see the pressing action and the clapper action?
Didn't see any of the video for the ironing.
All right, let's do it again.
Well, I don't know why I did that, so.
All right, well, let's turn this so you can kind of peek back.
Well, why don't you, I mean, it's already pressed. Show them here on the table, like what you did, right?
Not really. Okay. All right, so I don't have the clapper.
You can get the clapper.
Well, thanks. All right. So, what I was attempting to show you was that you need to make sure this seam lays flat here. So you're going to take the iron and press it this way, steam, and then come in with the clapper to make it nice and flat. But you have to do this on both sides and then confirm that nothing has rolled this way. Because you go in and you're top stitching from this side, and then you get to the back and you find that it just looks messy and this is rolled down. So you don't want that to happen. So make sure you use a clapper, and then we're going to top stitch this back seam. And I'm going to start with the needle width away. And then I'm going to do a second row, just like I did on the pocket. And I'm going to double top stitch most of the seams on this shirt. And that's just a preference. In some fabrics you're going to say, oh, this one really looks like it needs to be double top stitch. It's very sporty, whatever. And another one you may only want to do the single. So this is where you make the decision. If you're not sure, do a little sample. Use your stitch sample, whatever. And then I'm going to stitch, and I pretty much use the foot as my guide along that stitching. That way, every double top stitching I do, I'm using that as my gauge so they all look the same. Alright, so then we have that. Okay, so now you're going to attach the fronts to the back at the shoulder seams. And we're going to burrito the shoulder seams. So there's no, home sewing patterns would have you hand stitch part of the shoulder seam. And it's simply not necessary. So this is the right side of our back, so we want to put the right side of our shirt to those shoulder seams. And the best thing you can do is lay it out and make sure that you've got the orientation correct, because I have people come to me in class and they've reversed these so their armhole is in the middle, and so the left is on the right and the right's on the left. So just get your orientation, make sure that your arm sides are on the outside, this is your neckline, everything is right before you get started. I like to avoid any stitch ripping that I can. Alright, so now we're going to pick up just the outside yoke and we're going to let the inside yoke fall. Because we're going to do this similar that we did with the back, where we're going to stitch this at 1/4 of an inch to hold it in place, and then when we actually burrito, we're going to do 3/8. And this is also a two-step process that can be done in one step, but that really does take some practice. And you'll see why in a minute if you haven't seen the burrito shoulder seam before. You'll understand what I'm talking about in a minute. All right. Now, flannel does stretch a little bit easier than just a basic shirting, so make sure that you're holding it firmly without pulling on it and stretching it. Keep everything the size that we cut it. Now we'll be able to just move right on over without even having to stop. You see that? Okay. Everything lined up and then go for it. Okay, just got a little thread to clip here. Okay, so now remember we've got this yoke and it has to sew to the shoulder seams here. So if you will take your shirt, there's the front over here, Here's the back. This is the shoulder seam we just stitched. This is the shoulder seam we want to stitch to this. So this has to twist. So what we're going to do is bring this up and twist this on top of it. And it's going to be a little clumsy because we're kind of folding that shirt shoulder up into this. So let's see how messy that looks, but if those two shoulder seams that are meant to go together are laying together, that's all you need. All that mess is going to go away in a minute. So I'm going to turn this over and we're going to stitch this now at 3/8 of an inch. And this is our Islander Burrito. So once I get my third hand to hold that in place, I'm going to come back here and make sure everything's lined up. And there we go. Now, this is just, if you haven't seen this before, you're going to love it because it's just slick as it can be. Because when we turn this out, and any ready-made shirt is made this way. So as you can see, this is the inside of the shirt, and there's no raw edges, and there's the outside of the shirt, no raw edges. We're going to do the same thing to the other side, and then I'm going to do the same pressing technique we did for the back and double top stitch. I will double top stitch, you don't have to, the shoulder seams. All right, let's see if there's any questions. And while we're waiting for questions, I'll just do this other shoulder. So again, it looks like this. This is the shoulder that's already been stitched. This is the one that hasn't. I'm going to bring these two to meet each other like that. And then you just follow your way down. I know that it can be confusing at first, but if you just think it through, I think you'll get it. When I was taught this, I was taught to do all three of these layers at the same time. Whew! And I think it's a whole lot easier to learn it this way. So again, this is a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And again, we just pull it right out, and both shoulders are nice and clean and ready for pressing and top stitching. Stop right here. I got the inside out. It's better. Now we can see the back. All right. Sorry about that. So again, because our center fronts are identical, when this gets attached on here, the pattern does not get interrupted. Now, because we took this little tuck in here, I know someone asked me the other day, well, isn't that going to interrupt the pattern? Well, it does, but not by enough that it makes a big difference. All right, is everybody ready to put their pockets on and do their plackets? No questions? I either did a really good job or you guys all left. I don't know which. Anyway, next week we're going to follow along with the pattern guide. And I hope you'll keep your pattern guide with you as you're sewing and watching, because anything that I might say that helps you remember, you can always jot down your notes right on the pattern guide. So, and of course, all the steps of the yoke are right here, so that might help you. For those of you who are making a collared version, we did the exact same thing when we did the Everybody shirt, except for this has a 3/8 inch neckline seam and the Everybody shirt has a 1/4. That's the only difference. So you'll make the collar exactly the same way. I would not recommend using the collar stand method that is on page 18. I was just trying something new when we did this. This is years ago. And I really feel the traditional way that we've always done it, which starts on page 20, is really the better way. And that's the way that everybody's was done. And I know some of you were really happy with your success from that. So just stick with that by going to page 20. And then we'll move on to the hood next week.
Okay, lots of good comments saying you make it look easy, and they're thanking you, so they are still there.
Okay.
Just a reminder, if you needed to see any of this again, or if you came in late, I know if you're doing the burrito for the first time, you might want to watch it a couple times or have it in front of you while you're doing it. The videos stay here on Facebook, or they'll be up on the YouTube channel, usually within 24 hours. Brenda had to leave today to take care of some stuff, so if it's a little bit later than usual,
she's on grandma duty.
She's on grandma duty. So, but with all the videos will go on to our YouTube channel with the playlist for this specific sew along.
Right. And I know the earth tone fabric is coming in later this week, and the red and black buffalo check is coming in later this week. So if you're interested in those, you can go ahead and place the order, and we'll be shipping first of next week. Unfortunately, we thought we'd have the purple passion back in this week, but that's going to take an extra week or two. But we will have the earth tone as well as the red and black check. We have more of this one, and we have that. And we have that beautiful cappuccino. Can you just kind of peruse that cappuccino shirt right there that I did for your dad? You can't get over there, hey? Can you point the camera that way? No, you can't. Okay. Well, maybe next week. Take a look at it on the website, though. The cappuccino is beautiful. It's hard to show it. I couldn't get a really good color match, but it is a very almost black brown, and then a gray and a black. So it's very sophisticated. It doesn't have that bold look. It has a more relaxed, not relaxed, more sophisticated look for a flannel.
All right. So we'll be back next week.
Yes, we will.
For the next part.
And don't forget to post the pictures of your everybody's. And if you get this done before the sew along's done, we want to see these too. So we want to see all your pictures. I know several people have bought the flannel and made the everybody's. So it will work in any of the shirts actually. But this is our easy shirt. We try to give you some of the easiest methods, and we say it's easy to make and easy to wear. And of course, if you're making it for anyone who likes to work outdoors, or especially someone younger, they love the hooded version. You can use the flannel for the hood, or you can use a sweatshirt fleece. So it was really fun being with you today, and we're looking forward to next week. We'll be here on Tuesday at 2 for Islander Sewing Systems. Remember, no pins, no basting, no kidding.
Bye-bye.